Hello and welcome. We will start very shortly, give everyone the time to join the webinar, so maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Hello, everyone. We will start in a minute. Let's give everyone the opportunity to join in and get their audio ready. We'll be starting in just a few moments. People are still joining. Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar. We'll be talking about platform engineering and how it can help your enterprise in the process of digital transformation. So today, what we'll be looking at is a very brief introduction to the topic of platform engineering, what internal developer platforms are, and how CI/CD in particular and CircleCI fit into the kind of bigger picture of an internal developer platform and what you can get out of it, the most important features, and how to essentially leverage CI/CD to the greatest extent when looking at it from a platform engineering perspective. We'll be talking about some features, demoing a couple of features, and as usual, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button in Zoom, and we will address them at the end. You also have the opportunity to let us know if you have any AV issues, if I have a issue screen sharing, whatever. So just let us know, please. What else? Yeah, you will get the recording, you'll get the slides afterwards. Yeah, there is also a thread on our forum where you can have, we can ask any further questions if you have them afterwards. I'll share the links to that as well. So yeah, whether you are working in platform engineering teams, as engineers, as managers, or you're working in an organization that's only starting on this process to establish a platform engineering discipline within your organization, or even thinking about it, it could be valid because you'll find hopefully a few bits of information that will help you. Anyway, now without further ado, let's crack on. My name is Zan Markin. I'm a senior developer advocate at CircleCI. I'm based in London, UK, and I really love talking about people about their kind of developer challenges, especially when it comes to setting up CI/CD, maintaining complex pipeline orchestrations. So if you have any questions or if you have any things you wish to discuss with me, please don't hesitate to reach out. So yeah, now let's go on and look at some platform engineering things. So it is for a fact that platform engineering is one of the hottest topics in technological organizations nowadays. I mean, apart from the other thing, especially in enterprises that are undertaking digital transformation. It's been going on around for a while now. The first platform engineering organization that I kind of had worked with directly was about 6 years ago. So it's been going on for a number of years now, but only now it feels like we've reached this critical mass of interest where everyone seems to be getting on board, trying to make sure that their development teams are as empowered as possible, as enabled as possible, and they can deliver at their best work at an optimal rate. So we also hear the word IDP quite often, or the acronym IDP. This means internal developer platforms, essentially a selection of tools, services, and also processes and practices, which kind of get used by application and product development teams, so they can build things faster. So they have a set of sensible constraints, if you will, that obviously help you work better as an engineering organization as a whole. And that's what platform engineering teams tend to be doing. They tend to work on this as a product where other product and application development teams are your customers. So this approach is essentially platform engineering. And the idea is to essentially balance this productivity. So give developers all of the tools that they might need, and also with reliability, constrain them so they are only using the tools that the organization is happy for them to use in a way that conform to the expected standards. Yeah, and the ideal state essentially is this self-serve approach for product teams. So any product team, you want them to become like this tiny little, very nimble, very agile moving startup, but obviously working within the larger constraint of a larger organization. I've talked to a number of these types of organizations that employ platform engineering or teams or practices. What usually happens is, or the form it usually takes, is a single platform engineering core team that is responsible for enabling multiple product teams or application teams. So that's the distinction: platform, application. They come in many names, many shapes, many forms. It could be platform teams, it could be cloud infrastructure teams, it could be a DevOps teams. We've heard about DevOps teams. We've had DevOps teams for probably a better part of a decade now. CI/CD engineering enablement, even SREs to a degree fall under that umbrella. But the sole kind of common objective they have is, yes, kind of give developers the freedom to kind of have the self-serve approach to building new things. What this usually materializes as is a selection of various standard components of developer experience. One of them could be like a programming language. So we will choose as an organization to use Java, C++, Python, but not, for example, Ruby or whatever. So you choose like a set of databases that you want to use, software vendors such as observability vendor, cloud vendor, feature flagging vendor, and of course also a CI/CD tool. So any of these things packaged as a collection of things that developers can just choose and use as sensible defaults can consist a platform. That can be just a set of tools, or it could have its own kind of front end maintained by this organization that kind of lets you provision new services, start new projects with these tools already set up, or taking a different approach. There is a ton of different options you could take. usually also one common thing is that you standardize something such as naming conventions, so that whenever you're kind of provisioning a new cloud resource, you know exactly from the name and the tags associated which team, which project is responsible to it. This is super important for tracking, especially when you have tens or even hundreds different teams following this approach. You kind of want to standardize one thing, and that's naming conventions. But yeah, today we will mostly talking about tooling, and of course, especially CI/CD and CircleCI, and how this fits at in a platform engineering setup or an organization. And the truth is that it fits really well because it's at the center of your internal development platform. Because if you think about CI/CD, it already is at the center of your software delivery lifecycle. So on one end, you have your product management tools like Jira. You're creating new tickets, and as a development teams, you are writing your code, you're pushing new code, testing it in a CI/CD tool, ultimately deploying it, running any security scans, any sort of things, so that can then be operated somewhere in the cloud in some kind of environment. Essentially, CI/CD tool ties everything together. You automate all the common tasks. And looking at it from a platform perspective, you're doing this 20 times over at the same time. But this kind of software delivery lifecycle keeps running always kind of in the same manner. That's why I think it's important to think about it in the center of everything. So even if you're when you're provisioning your infrastructure, you're probably using a CI/CD tool. Even if you are automating external tools and services, for example, your chat tools, your project management tools, you can automate that using your CI/CD tool. And that's when it really shines as your kind of core of your internal development platform. So as a team responsible for platform maintenance and platform engineering, you want to think about how do we centralize the best practices. And that's obviously something's really important, because obviously if you run this all the time with every team, we want to make sure that you're kind of you want to establish the best practices so that everyone can replicate this, so that their pipelines are the fastest, are the most stable as possible. And maybe you want to templatize it for new projects. So when you're creating a new project, let's say a new microservices, you have your CI/CD template already created so that you can start using it, start building in matter of seconds. This includes, like, maybe you have a set security scanning tool. We talked about product management tools, observability tools, all of these things. You can integrate that in your kind of template to get started in a matter of seconds or minutes, if you will. So yeah, CircleCI in particular obviously lends its hand to a large number of engineering organizations, especially as they grow, because you can use it with whatever, right? Whether you're building backend services, whether you're building mobile apps for iOS, Android, whether you're training ML models, we have resource classes for that purpose that you can use, and any team in your organization can essentially use them. On top of that, you see a powerful, you have this powerful insights feature, which kind of gives you this deep level of analytics that you can see, okay, these pipelines are running the most often, these pipelines are running the least often, these pipelines are broken the most often. Why are they broken so often? Let's find out. You can dig deep into issues like that with ease. all the way down to looking at individual tests, which ones are the fastest, which ones are the best, the worst performing, and allocate your limited resources. Let's be clear, everyone has limited resources. Allocate them where it matters. You can also use it to establish varying levels of guardrails. Essentially, you can set up config policies to limit what can be used and in what manner it can be used. You can set up roles and permissions to your deployment, for example, so that only particular team members can initiate deployment to production, for example. You can create private orbs, etc. So things we will be talking about through the duration of this webinar. So there are two main components of CircleCI. We'll talk about a few others, but in one end, you have this configuration. Everything is configured via code. It's a config.yaml file, which is part of your repository, tied to the same commit, executed when you push, call an API to trigger it, and that basically describes everything. You have your dashboard where you can see everything, and there are a few other components like the API, webhooks. We even have a Visual Studio Code integration, which makes it so that you don't really need to go into the dashboard that often. We have CLI, stuff like that. Looking at the configuration at the top level, at the project level, we're defining a pipeline, which can have one or many workflows. And workflow is what is a collection of jobs that executes. For example, my regular commit workflow, my release workflow, my scheduled testing workflow. And in them, there are jobs which can run either in parallel or sequentially, and each job executes in a specific runtime environment. For example, Dockerized environment based on a specific image or a virtual machine. And it executes a set of commands, essentially, which are ultimately command line instructions. One last thing that's worth mentioning are orbs, which are essentially our way to integrate with external tools, reuse config across projects. So, for example, you have orbs encapsulating logic for most popular programming languages, most popular cloud vendor tools, and yeah, you can write your own and ultimately work faster, get to results faster, get to shipping faster. So yeah, we said a few things about platform engineering and in general, CI/CD and platform engineering, and CircleCI in particular. And one thing to keep in mind that, because there is a lot, and not every organization is running a platform team supporting dozens and hundreds of development teams. You might not even have a platform team yet, but the key things to remember here is that you can apply these approaches incrementally. That's the core tenet of CI/CD approach, right? You can do it incrementally, step by step, verifying and validating your new changes as you go along. So yeah, how do we do that? We start small. We start with one type of projects. We then move on to different type of project, and then it's gonna expand from this single starting point. Okay, so now we will be looking at a few features and how you might use them. First, we will look at CircleCI platform itself. So we have a nice overview of what it does, how it looks. And then we will be looking at features that help you speed up your pipelines. Again, something that's valuable for every single one on your team. Features that help your pipelines be more secure, your software ultimately be more secure, your business be more secure, and things that help you integrate with a wider array of tools. So let's look at CircleCI. What we're looking at is the CircleCI app, so the dashboard. So I'm logged into my GitHub organization. I'm using GitHub as my VCS in this case. And I'm looking at this from a user's perspective, right? So I have a bunch of pipelines in my dashboard that I can see, my consumer task, my application. I can have multiple applications, multiple pipelines or projects that I could be following depending on my role. If you're a single developer working in a single team, you probably have a fewer than if you're responsible for 10 or 20 teams and their pipelines. And you see at the first glance, oh, the top things are the most recent. You see what's ran, how long it took to run, and which jobs ran in that particular pipeline. So going into a particular pipeline, this corresponds to a project in GitHub in this case, because I've connected this to GitHub. And in there, you also have this thing called a workflow. Essentially, yes, a directed graph of jobs. You can see that some jobs depend on other jobs. So my create Kubernetes cluster wouldn't even get triggered unless all of these have passed. And then you can just change them and graph them around until you reach your desired graph shape, I suppose. Going into a particular job, you see its steps, the durations, you see the resource class that's been used. So Docker in my case, how long it took for each specific job. We can see the console output. So for example, this is my checkout step. This is my Docker build step. This is my Docker build step and the exit code, of course. So pretty standard and expected for a CI/CD tool. Looking at the configuration. So as I said, it's all YAML. It's all kind of this config file, part of this repository, where we define our jobs, if this is not visible, let me know. I can zoom in a little bit. Yeah. My workflow. So I have my test scan deploy workflow, which corresponds to the workflow you see here. We kind of have a list of jobs with requires specified, so that's how the graph is constructed. Looking at a particular job, let's look at my build Docker image job, for example. So I've specified a Dockerized environment based on an image. These are our images. So CircleCI builds and maintains our own kind of fleet of convenience images for Docker. So base is the lightest one, which still has things like JQ, curl pre-installed. They're based on Ubuntu usually, and they're kind of optimized for a CI/CD use case. And because these are most commonly used images, we also cache them. So you can spin them up in a matter of seconds, which gives you this really fast execution times. So again, series of steps or a list of steps: checkout, setup remote Docker, Docker check, Docker build, Docker push. So pretty standard. So these are actually coming from an orb. So Docker / means they are coming from this Docker orb. Same for node / install packages comes from a node orb. It just allows us to write less YAML essentially to get the same result. Yeah, let me show you the insights as well. So, so this is another thing you can see at the organization level, at an individual project level. You see, oh, these are my most run projects, least run projects, most successful projects. You can sort by success rates, things like that. How much you're consuming as well. So you see, okay, let's see, 24 hours. Yeah, my last workflow runs, they lasted for about 13 to 15 minutes. One failed. Obviously, the more you run, the nicer the graphs look and the more respective, to kind of help you identify issues as quickly as possible. You can even go into a job level, see, oh, these are my approve destroys my longest running job. Create is also my longest running job. This particular job runs uses the most CPU and RAM, that kind of stuff. You see all of that. You even see like test insights as well. So if you're an individual developer, you see stuff like that. So for anyone on the team, you can get a ton of ideas of where to improve things. Yeah, we're constantly adding new things to this. So it's worthwhile having a look at what the insights are telling you. You can configure webhooks. So as each job and workflow is run, you can configure a webhook to be triggered somewhere. And obviously that gets, you can intercept, collect your own stats, etc. And you can even trigger, you can even trigger pipelines and do everything with the API. So yeah, there is the API that kind of gives you the ability to do every single thing that the dashboard does. And I mentioned our Visual Studio Code extension, which we have, which basically integrates right there and there. You can do pretty much everything that you can do on the dashboard, again, right there from Visual Studio Code, if you're using that. So these are the top level platform features. But now let's look at how you can make your teams more successful. One of the main objectives of every single engineering team that I talk with is, how do we make pipelines run faster? Because we don't want to be sitting around waiting on our build to complete. We don't want to be wasting essentially developer time and effort on this. So there are a bunch of things. And if you take this kind of centralized center of excellence approach that most platform teams tend to take, you build up this knowledge and expertise in pipelines in your CI/CD tool, so that you can then give it and deliver it to everyone on your teams. So one thing that you can do is employ parallelism. So again, let's look at our project. So as I said, like by default, if you define a workflow with no kind of with all the jobs in there with no requirements, they're all going to run in parallel. So easy parallelism. So all the different tests, all the different scans, is trigger as many as possible at the beginning so that you get the results as fast as possible. Then you can even go a bit deeper and configure something like test splitting. So if you have a long running test suite, for example, 20 minutes, 1 hour, and that means you're running a bunch of tests, like hundreds of tests, you can think about splitting them across multiple parallel job runs. So instead of running a whole suite of tests in one container, it's going to run a subset in a larger number of containers. In my case, I'm employing parallelism of 4, and they are basically running for about 1 minute each. So you get what could have been like 4.5 minutes built down to like 1.5 minutes. So a significant saving easily. And you still kind of collate all of the tests, all of the results. And the way to do this, essentially, have your build and test job, you add this parallelism key, which specifies how many parallel jobs we're going to run. And then you modify the test run command to use the CircleCI tests split. And you basically need to pass it the list of tests, all of the tests, and combined with storing the test results. So we look at the JUnit formatted test results. We will figure out a nice grouping for you across the as many jobs as you want, essentially, and then you pass this to your kind of regular test command. So my npm run test CI takes the list of test files. So pretty useful. So that's one thing. Caching is another very good example of making things go faster, as fast as possible. So by default, when we are running something, for example, getting dependencies for your projects like Node.js, Go, whatever language you're using, you have to resolve them from a central repository, whether it's Maven, npm, whatever it is. But you can also just cache them, comparing them to an existing kind of package lock in Node or requirements.txt or build.gradle, Maven POM, exactly, etc. You define your dependencies and you basically see, oh, nothing has changed. We can just restore them from cache. And the way to do this is either use the special keys for save cache, restore cache, or if you're using one of the most popular languages, or tools, for example, Node.js, you can just use the command that's built into the orb, which will essentially automate things like caching for you. So it'll just do it out of the box with like one node/install packages command, which again makes things a lot faster. If you have a large file to download, large amount of files to download, this is really fast because obviously it comes from a local network. The other things that you can cache is, especially if you're building Docker images as part of your pipelines, you can turn on Docker layer caching. So if you look at the Docker file, it has a bunch of instructions, and we can cache everything apart from the instruction that's actually got anything changed. So if you're copying any build files, you can cache everything up until that point. And how will this look in your pipeline? So for example, we have a Docker build. You'll just say, oh, using cache. Oh, run using cache, and only then you will start building your image. And yeah, you can get significant time savings as well very easily. Again, we showed you how to utilize insights. I've not shown you how to look at the resource tabs as well. So every single build, okay, obviously this one didn't run for a long time. Let me go to a previous build, maybe this one. Let's say, look at this one. This one ran for 20 seconds as opposed to previously. So we are like about 50% of the CPUs. And obviously we're not there with RAM, but like if you're seeing any limits in this resource class, like, oh, you're hitting your number of CPUs, you're hitting your amount of RAM, maybe increase that. There are a bunch of different resource classes. If you have a Mac OS pipeline, for example, if you're building iOS applications, Mac applications, you can consider getting the M1. This is like something we recently released. So Apple Silicon support for CI/CD pipelines. So we've seen significant increase, like 50% compared to the kind of Intel-based Mac hardware. If you have machine learning use case, usually you're interested in using a GPU, so you can get one of those virtual machines as well. And again, insights help you figure out where the bottlenecks are and then doing this. Another one that's very, very fresh is rerunning failed tests. So similar to how test splitting works, we have this CircleCI tests run command, and that allows you to run a subset of all the tests that have failed. So if you have 100 tests, 1,000 tests, 100,000 tests, and only like 2 failed because there's some flakiness to them, you can run only those 2 with a single command, which saves you probably a lot of resources and potentially hours of execution time. And yeah, it's definitely something worth checking if you have any flakiness in your tests that you want to combat. If you have pipelines that keep failing, or you're debugging a pipeline, there is also an option to rerun with SSH. So if you're at a job, if you're looking at a job, you have this rerun option here, which allows you to rerun it with SSH enabled. And that will essentially run the same container, but turn on SSH for it, so that you will get SSH command that you can use locally to connect. So copy this in your terminal, connect to it, and you can inspect the state of this container as if it was your local machine, which is really, really powerful. You don't have to redo a ton of things. So I'm just going to cancel this now. So yeah, things you can do to help your teams run pipelines faster. Probably the most often requested of kind of standard DevOps or infra or platform teams who specialize in maintaining CI/CD pipelines and infrastructure. The other important thing is, of course, security and compliance and governance. So when you have a lot of projects that you're responsible for, you want to make sure that everyone is operating at the security standards that you expect, that you require. So there's a few things you can do. You can integrate things like security scanning, like we've looked at. Back to our workflow, we have a dependency vulnerability scan. So in this case, we're actually using Snyk, an external vendor, to run a security scan on our dependencies. And that's essentially like downloading your CLI, running it, and it would fail the build if it will fail the job if Snyk detected some kind of dependency vulnerability as it was configured. And ultimately, it's just down to, here we go. Yeah, it's just down to getting the orb and running a command, and it's easy as that, essentially. So that's a job that you can do depending on which kind of vendor you have. Some of them have more manual steps than others, but it's usually like get their tool, run the tool, job done. So yeah, for secrets, we have the ability to inject environment variables into pipelines using contexts. So contexts are essentially looking at the again, the dependency vulnerability scan job, we have this context specified, which is CI/CD workshop sneak. This one has a Docker and sneak, and this one has a Terraform Cloud and DigitalOcean. So depending on different contexts, you can apply them to a job in a particular workflow. And they can essentially contain various environment variables as secrets. So it'll only be accessible to that particular job that has this context applied. That's one thing. You can also restrict context to different projects. So only this project can have it. And you can, probably my favorite feature is like you can add security groups. So if you have like your, in GitHub, for example, you have your GitHub organizations, you have your teams, you can have security groups apply to those teams. And if a user is not member of the required team, the build would fail once it reaches that point that requires this context. So it will fail as an unauthorized. So you can essentially have parts of pipeline that only deploy to production, that only the verified people have access to deploying, which is, again, very, very powerful if you want to ensure access control. Approval job is a special type of job, which is only defined in a workflow itself. It's got a special type of approval, and it doesn't do anything. It just waits for a manual command. Again, if you have a security scan, if you have a report that you need to review, if you have a release management process that requires you to have a dedicated release manager, you can have an approval job that only that people in that group have access to confirming before deploying somewhere. And that person can then review all the documentation and only trigger the release whenever they are happy with it to sign it off. You can do this as part of your pipelines to kind of automate as much as possible until your organization will allow it. If you don't want to store secrets in CircleCI itself, there is a possibility to use OIDC or OpenID Connect. So looking at any job that has context applied, you will see this OIDC token injected. So this you can configure as a OIDC provider in AWS, in GCP. You can configure CircleCI so that they are essentially authenticating separately from the pipeline itself, and the pipeline just gets the token that rotates every hour or so. So again, this gives you the greater flexibility to run things. I have a little demo here. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but essentially I have a demo where you have a platform centralized cloud infrastructure team maintaining this role provisioning pipeline that uses OIDC to connect to AWS, create new roles, and then subsequent consumer pipelines. They basically use the newly created roles as contexts and use those roles when they are creating and using their resources, so that you automate all of this flow. And you just need CircleCI, just need a bit of Terraform, and you can build things like that in a central repository. We have things like config policies. I mentioned it already. So you write your policies in Rego, you apply them to the organization, and then you can say, oh, you have to have a security scanning orb. You have to have use a particular image of this with this version, with this resource class. You need to have them, otherwise the policy evaluation is going to fail. You can see it in here. So anything that you can configure in the config usually can be defined as a policy as well, using config policies. You can request IP ranges. For example, if you're deploying to an external vendor, we can assure you that only the jobs will only run from one of the set IP ranges. If you need to run jobs on your infrastructure, you can use self-hosted runners. Again, you define them right there in the dashboard. Create a new resource class, and basically that can then either install on a virtual machine, it can install on your Kubernetes using a Helm chart, and you can spawn new jobs from CircleCI Cloud onto your infrastructure if you, for example, don't want the code to leave your servers, or if you need to run something behind a firewall. Again, stuff you can centralize, stuff you can establish as policies in your organization. Audit logs and security context and another examples of what you can do. So yeah, we can do much more. We can go a little bit beyond the core pipelines. We can integrate, of course, with external services, and that doesn't only include vendors such as security scanning. There could be different types of vendors. We have a full marketplace of orbs with hundreds of them available. You can write your own, either for the organization, or if you're a vendor, you can create your own orbs as well for that tool. For example, if you have a particular cloud infrastructure needs, you can create your own orbs so that all of your projects can use that single orb. You update them centrally, and they will have the latest code as well, and they're not accessible to anyone else. I mentioned config templates. This is actually something that a repository VCS will offer. So you have your templated repositories so that you create a new repository, you know you're using Java, you know you're using Spring, you just enter your name, you have your pipeline already there, it's already configured to run the test, it's already configured to run a security scan based on your conventions, based on your requirements, so that you start a new project in a matter of minutes. You don't have to essentially reinvent the wheel, if you will. And of course, I mentioned the API. So the API is super powerful, right? So you can trigger pipelines, which is probably my favorite feature here. You could trigger a pipeline and even pass in parameters. So if you have a pipeline, you can, at the top level, you can define certain parameters. By default, they are not set when you trigger it via a VCS push. So you commit and push to GitHub, it's not going to be setting anything apart from the defaults. But with the API, you can actually trigger those. You can drive more complex integrations. You can create a chatbot that will build your projects on demand, or you can have a schedule that will trigger your pipeline every hour, every night, with a set of tests. So if you want to do a full suite of tests nightly, you can do that. You can orchestrate triggering pipelines from other pipelines. For example, I have my example here, run external tests, right? So this one takes a project name, an organization name. Again, these are default. These are like job level parameters. And then it essentially triggers an API call to CircleCI. And I'm passing in my image name parameter to kind of run external tests on the image that we just built, for example. That's possible. If you're building like libraries that are dependent on by other projects, that could be something you want to do. Yeah, and what else do we have? Yeah, we have schedule pipeline support. Again, you want to run nightly tests, you can do that. You can run dynamic pipelines. So a pipeline can have workflows that are split so that first you run this type of setup workflow, which could check external state of the projects based on whatever rules you want, and then run arbitrary YAML that you either have pre-written and just toggle parameters, or even write your YAML on the fly from a pipeline, run that. So that's, again, increases in complexity, but also increases in power and usability. So depending on what you need, there's probably something out there. So yeah, this kind of brings me to my final point, which is, if you've not seen this, we do release this thing called State of Software Delivery, which is our flagship report. We released it a few months ago, and we have a platform take on pretty much everything. We look at probably like 15 million jobs run between in September last year. And we took the entire month, all of the jobs that ran on, I think, GitHub on our CircleCI cloud, and give you a set of benchmarks to kind of compare against. So, for example, what's my success rate that I'm looking at? So 90% should be something that the most prolific users of CircleCI are achieving, and this is the benchmark to meet. Mean time to recovery. How long should you let your main branch or default branch be in the red, not passing? Less than 60 minutes. So, so some really good takes on everything with a platform perspective on things like speed and things like that. So I recommend you checking it out. The link will be shared with you after the presentation as well. So yeah, to conclude, so we've talked about development platforms and what they really do. And essentially, they combine the self-service approach that development teams like because they feel enabled, they feel empowered, they are more productive that way, with the ability to standardize and optimize for productivity and making this in a repeatable manner so that dozens of teams can do the same thing with equal-ish capability or efficiency. Usually see a central kind of platform infrastructure organization that supports multiple teams, like a hub and spoke model. And of course, CI/CD is the glue that every single one of those teams will use. The platform team will use it, the product teams will use it, the application teams will use it, everyone will use it. And so it's best to invest into developing this expertise, right? Developing this expertise for that particular platform. And as usual with software, gradual and incremental and well-tested, well-measured approach tends to be the best because it gives you the results the fastest, and it allows you to course correct as you go, making sure you're building the right product for the right audience, which is your development teams. With that, I am happy to take any questions. And of course, if you have any questions after the session, there is the link to our forum where you can ask more, and I'll be addressing them as we see them. There is a Q&A button that you can press to ask anything. Now, let's see if we have anything yet. Okay, there is something about the M1. Yes, we have M1 support now. It's fairly new as of looking at this. And yeah, everything you really need to do to enable it is toggle this as a resource class. So there's a blog post that I have open. So you specify it like this. So Mac OS and obviously which version of Xcode you want and resource class Mac OS M1. The question was, do you have something similar for mobile pipelines? I saw most of this focus on web/Docker. We do webinars for a bunch of different platforms. I tend to get most questions about containerized backend application, and this is just the examples are based on the workshop that I tend to run. So yeah, but if there is interest in a mobile specific workshop, I'm happy to or a webinar, I'm happy to hold that one as well. Yeah, as I said, we do pretty much everything, and I do have some mobile background. So yeah, maybe we can actually ask a poll about any further content people would like to see, and if there's interest in mobile, I can definitely make that happen. Oh, we had a couple of, oh, there's another one. Okay, do you have any recommendations for tooling to help with more complex configurations? You mentioned dynamic configurations and tasks that trigger pipelines in other projects. Recommendations, I can show you how it's how you can do it. Recommendations tend to be very specific to each individual project because dynamic configuration in particular is so powerful and so flexible that you can use it in a number of different ways. For example, triggering pipelines in other projects. This is my kind of run external tests example. Why would you want to do this? Usually it's because you have some kind of library that you published, or you want to run a centralized testing repository, invoke that asynchronously. So the recommendation is, if you have a need for something like that, you can do this. This is how you could, this is one way you could do it. Usually I suggest storing a token under CircleCI token and just making curl requests. Or if you want to make an orb for that, I would be very happy to see one as well. Dynamic configuration, I have something in a different repository. Let me find it. Let me find it. I think I have it. Trying to find my dynamic configuration. Example. And I don't think I have it in this project. Again, I do have it as a part of a workshop, and we do have resources on the blog for that, and of course the docs. which obviously I can point you to, but I will be linking the blog post as well. And the blog post that I wrote for triggering pipelines across pipelines. Again, these are just to give you an idea. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. But yeah, as a recommendation is, as far as recommendations go, it tends to be quite, usually it's too specific for different projects. But yeah, we will be linking those resources. Thank you. If there are any further questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I think we are at time. Yeah, so thank you all for attending. I hope this was interesting to you. I hope you found something useful. And yeah, feel free to ask any further questions in the forum, and hope to see you at a future session. Thank you very much, and bye.